Being somebody who grew up in small towns myself, I really empathize and get a good scare from these small town horror stories. Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. It's good to see you made it back for another episode. Today I'm going to be sharing some creepy and allegedly true small town horror stories sent in by viewers just like you. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that truly help keep this show going. Now, without any further hesitation, let's get into these creepy and allegedly true small town horror stories. My name is Tracy, and last summer my family and I took a trip to England and the surrounding UK. I mean, last summer as in 2019, not 2020. Obviously, since COVID scrapped everyone's travel plans this year. Just to clarify and avoid any confusion with my timeline. I am from the western United States and enjoy traveling. My family usually takes a holiday once a year together around the United States. But this year, 2019, we were going out of the country. I used to go every year when I lived with my parents, but I am now 25 and married, living on our own. However, we still get invited to go on family trips with them, and this is one of them that I was able to go for. My parents very generously invited us along and offered to pay for our fares to the UK. We gratefully accepted and ecstatically anticipated the adventure. It has been a dream of my father's to return to England for a long time. My father had lived there in England for a few years while working for the church growing up. My father had lived in England for a few years while working for the church. Growing up, he would tell us stories of some of his experiences with the people he met there, as well as the places he had visited, the cultural differences, how he missed the food, how the weather was, and how fog would roll in from the ocean and enshroud the city. He also had some otherworldly stories I did not like to mention or delve into too much. But if we asked, he would claim to not know what we were talking about a lot of the time to try to switch the subject. I still do not know all the details from a lot of his stories to this day. After being turned away so much from them, I have learned to stop asking. However, my interest in such stories and happenings was always kindled by this. I was extremely excited to visit the UK, since I had grown up hearing so much about it, and on top of that, I love exploring new foreign places and cultures. We started our trip in London, and were making a road trip to Inverness, then looping back to London, making stops along the way. Along the way, we saw that there is a lot of history to behold. There are many places that seemed as if they had been frozen in time from the 1800s. It was an interesting and beautiful trip, as we took a train away from the big city of London to York, and then rented a car to take back to Edinburgh and Inverness. Cobblestone roads leading up to castles set upon green hills and cliffsides directed my thoughts to the time periods where these feats of man were still in operation for their initially intended uses. These country settings forced the infamous mariner's log regarding the rake to my mind. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed, I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again, at the request of the rake. Stories of the rake resurfaced and filed through my mind as we drove down the narrow roads of Scotland back towards London. We had been in the UK for a little over a week, and our next stop along the way was to a really small town in the Lake District. This town had a lot of tangling cobblestone streets coursing through tightly packed houses and stores which were all gathered around one another, lining a strip of the lake. Outside of the town was nothing but countryside for miles. It was a very gorgeous and pristine place, but also quiet. I grew up around the wilderness and quiet meadows and mountainsides, although here I almost felt uneasy. The day we were driving in, I started to get sick with a terrible sore throat and cough. and to make things worse, my ears had been plugged up for the entire 5.5-hour car ride. We pulled up to the house that would be ours for the next 3 days in the late afternoon time, as the sun was beginning its descent and started to paint the sky yellow. We unloaded our bags and took them inside. There were a kitchen and living room on the first floor, and a steep staircase leading to a master bedroom on the left, and a second bedroom on the right. My wife and I's room was the one on the right. We lugged our bags up and put them on the bed, and then examined our room and bathroom that was connected in the back of the room. There was a window that looked down on the cobblestone street, and the other tight houses packed around the U-shaped piece of the street that we were located on. Looking out the window from the bed, we could only see the steeply stacked roof shingles and the protruding metal chimney pipes. One thing that I found odd as I first walked into the room was that it looked like an access window to an attic. I am used to attic panels being in the ceiling and not quite so big, but these panels were in the wall maybe a foot above where the headrest of our bed was. It was about 3 foot by 3 foot, cut out into the wall with 2 white wooden boards matching the size fit into the exact same spot. The left board fit perfectly into the frame, but the board on the right was set a little further back so that it could be slid behind the board to allow a passage. The right board even had a small hand cut out on the right side of it, proving its purpose as a type of sliding door. I did not think much of it, simply that it was an odd place for an attic to me. We then left the house, not thinking much of it, simply that it was an odd place for an attic to be. We then left the house with everyone to go grab dinner from a restaurant in town. Upon returning from dinner, we retired to our rooms, all of us exhausted from travel. I stayed up for a while talking with my wife and knowing that it was going to be hard for me to sleep with how sore my throat was. I'd not had a sore throat that bad since I had strep throat a few years back. As we got ready for bed and lay down, I started re-examining the room. While looking around the room, I fixed my gaze on the boards to the attic above our bed, and noticed that the right board in the attic doorway had not been in its frame tracked for sliding. It was a slight angle with the top of it leaned up against the top of the frame from the inside, and the bottom set back slightly into the attic, leaving about a 1/4-inch gap, if that, along the sides of the bottom portion of the board, which allowed a peek at the pitch-dark space within the attic. This detail didn't seem incredibly weird to me at this time. What made me uncomfortable was the fact that we would be sleeping with our heads so close to a door leading into an unknown space that we had not been in or seen. But it was just an attic, after all. I had not opened the attic because I figured it was none of my business to snoop through somebody else's attic. I was trying to be respectful. It came time to turn out the light and go to sleep. The atmosphere of the town mixed with my head cold and the fact that we were sleeping under a creepy attic door left me feeling on edge. I figured that the faster I fell asleep, the faster I would not be conscious to overthink and keep myself up all night with my thoughts. I took some cold medicine, which ended up knocking me out rather quickly. The next morning, as we were getting up and ready for the day, I noticed that my wife Kathy looked very tired still. I asked if she felt sick, and she replied that she just did not sleep much last night. I asked why not, was I tossing and turning too much? She said that was not it, so I asked her why she could not sleep. She started to explain that she was woken up in the middle of the night, probably around 2 a.m., by a cold burst of air rushing past her that made her hairs all stand up. As she laid there trying to shake that eerie feeling of being watched in attempts to fall back asleep, she heard a lady's voice begin to cry from behind the boards to the attic. Since my parents were in the room right across the stairway from us, Kathy first thought it was my mom crying softly in the other room. But it was not long until the crying got louder and closer. It sounded like it was coming directly from behind the boards to the attic, then it would occasionally appear to be coming from higher up in the wall. It was breathy, heavy sobs, followed by prolonged wails of lamentation. The crying, which stopped for a few seconds, only to have long and deliberate scratching up and down the walls from within the attic take its place. Then the woman's voice would start to whine, whimper, and cry loudly all over again. For over 2 hours, the woman's voice would start to whine and do all these crazy things that we had mentioned. And then suddenly, it just stopped. The quiet of the night returned, but the sun was only about an hour from rising at that point, so she stayed up, cuddled up next to me. I was astonished when I heard all of this, as anyone should be. Kathy asked my mom just to be sure if she had been crying all night last night, and my mom, rightfully confused, said that she had not been. No one else had been awake to hear anything. I decided to not dwell on it and to try to avoid all mention of it happening, because we still had one more night in this place before we were to leave the Lake District, and I did not want to be a burden on her all day. After a full day of taking in different sights in the countryside, it was again time to come back to the town, have dinner, and settle in for the night. We stayed up a little later talking and laughing to keep our minds off of what had happened until we were pretty tired. After turning out the light, I felt myself dozing in and out of sleep after seeing that Kathy had fallen asleep next to me. I rolled over on my side, facing the window. As I felt myself about to succumb to slumber, I felt an overwhelming feeling of being helpless. I froze, as if I felt like I was being watched from behind. I glanced around the part of the room that was within my viewpoint without moving. I did not see anything. Nothing outside the window either. It felt like I was being watched from behind, though. My back was now turned to the loose, right sideboard to the attic, as well as the opposite side of the room where our door to the stairs were. My hairs all stood on end as I lay motionless now, noticing that the air was cold. I started to hear someone running around in the small gravel driveway down below the window where the car was parked. This small driveway is also gated. Footsteps in the gravel happened for a few minutes, and then it got quiet. Not too long after, there were sounds that sounded like something had gotten on the roof. Light scratching started on one portion of the roof and led to another part above us. This was followed by gravel consequently rolling down the shingles back to the ground below. Then, everything got exceptionally quiet. But the feeling of being stalked did not go away. I forced myself to focus my mind on something else. Before long, I was falling back to sleep in an unearthly silence. When I woke up, the sky was a faint dim blue as the morning was about to break. I had only slept for a couple of hours. The place still felt eerie, but I no longer felt like I was being watched. I remained in bed, staring out the window and contemplating the events that had taken place here over the past 2 nights while the sky grew brighter. It was not long after that everyone else started to wake up and get out of bed. We still had more to see, but we needed to pack everything up since we would not be coming back to this house. I was grateful to never have to be in that place again. After our bags were packed and we were getting ready to take them downstairs to the car, I looked at the attic door. I felt chills trickle down my back and my eyes widened as I realized the board on the right-hand side had been moved. The board had previously only been a 1/4 inch thick, if that, towards the bottom, before we fell asleep that last night, and now it was widely and noticeably cracked open, almost 2 inches. I could not help but be terrified to have everything that had occurred over the past few nights be confirmed by this one minor detail. The board was moved. Something, or someone had to have moved it while we were asleep through the night. We had been stalked. Quickly, I packed up our belongings in the car and never looked back at that place. While driving away, Kathy and I discussed what had gone on. I asked if she had ever heard of the rake, and she denied ever hearing about it. She had a confused look on her face. I described a few accounts that I had come across and read, and related them back to what happened to us, telling her that I had kept them from her to avoid scaring her any further than she already had been. No sooner had our car left the town, I started to feel normal again. Any unnatural feelings were gone, and I never wished to return to the Lake District. I like to think of myself as a normal guy. I do not profess to be psychic or communicate with spirits. I just try to live the best I can for myself, my family, and God. Growing up in a very Christian home, believing in or talking about the paranormal was generally frowned upon and paramount to inviting demons into your home, so we just did not talk about it. I was a very young boy between the ages of 4 and 6 growing up in southern Idaho, in an old yellow and brown house in a small town called Weston. I come from a large family, 1 brother and 4 sisters. That will be relevant later. Like I said, my family was religious, and talk of the paranormal or anything along those lines was just not acceptable, or even really thought of. So when I was a young child and started having experiences outside of the normal, my mother didn't know how to deal with it. I remember distinctly asking my mother when I was 4 or 5, "Mom, is this house haunted?" My mother shrugged off the question and said, "No, this house belonged to the bishop's brother. The bishop was the title of the religious leader at our church, like a pastor, so it couldn't be haunted." Now, my mother, being Christian, believed in spirits and demons because they are in the Bible, but I don't think she wanted to believe that they could be real in this day and age or affect her family. I think she just did not want to know or deal with it, honestly. Looking back, that explanation does not hold water. Why would it matter if the house belonged to a religious leader's brother? Any place or anyone, in my opinion, can be subject to a haunting no matter how religious or righteous they might be. The reason I asked my mother if the house was haunted at such a young age was that I had started to see things in the house. Our house was a rambler-style home, which means it had a ground floor and a basement only. In the basement was a square kind of hallway that all the rooms were attached to, with one central staircase that was only access to the basement. I remember either being in my bed or sometimes on the stairs looking into the central hallway, and watching a dark black figure walking from room to room, back and forth over and over again, crisscrossing one another. I would have this reoccurring ominous feeling that someone would be watching me as I slept, so I would always sleep toward the wall and try to pretend I was asleep. I would have reoccurring nightmares of waking up with dark beings in my bed, and then, in my dream, I would try to outrun the thing, and they would get to me before I could get to my parents' room. Sometimes I made it, but sometimes it did not. But I always woke up terrified nonetheless. Because of these nightmares, I would often sleep with my parents. One night as I lay awake next to my mother, trying to sleep, from the angle of the bed where I lay, I could see into the upstairs hallway. My parents often left the door open in case one of the kids had wandered into their rooms at night. And as I lay, looking in the hall, I could see a white translucent figure that would walk up to the bedroom door and stand for a moment, then wander down the hallway. It would do this for hours. I remember it was so large that it would fill the entire door, and so tall that the top of its head was above the door frame. Like I said before, the being was all transparent and white, except for its head, which had dark areas in it that would almost morph and writhe, making skeletal and terrifying shapes and faces. It's really hard to describe, because it was just so bizarre to think about, and I have never seen anything quite like it. I told my mother about what I had seen, but she dismissed it and told me that I must have been seeing the lights of passing cars. But the problem is with that theory is that we lived in a small town, like I said, and barely anybody would drive by our house. We moved out of that house when I was about 7, but not before I had this terrifying experience. I remember distinctly my mother cooking dinner in the kitchen. I was in there, with her playing around and getting excited to eat. Now, remember, I have 4 sisters, and so with sisters comes dolls. They had these super realistic porcelain dolls that they had loved and decorated their rooms with. There was one in particular that always gave me a strange feeling. It was the biggest one they had, with long black hair and dark realistic glass eyes. I hated all of them, of course. They were all just so creepy, but I really hated that one the most. Anyway, as my brother was cooking, she said that dinner would be a while and told me to get my reading book and to do some homework before we ate. So I reluctantly went in search of my backpack. It was of course in my sister's room. That was where the Nintendo resided after school. I would sometimes make a beeline for the Nintendo and set my backpack aside in the room. I moped into my sister's room, but when I got there, none of my siblings were there and the room felt cold and strange. I spotted the hated doll with the black hair lying down on the bed in the middle of the room, but chose to ignore my fear and grab my book out of my bag on the floor. I bent down and got my book out of the bag, and just as I did so, I saw a motion out of the corner of my eye. Of course, my head automatically followed the movement, and I looked in the direction that the movement had came from. My eyes locked with the doll's, who now sat straight up in the bed with its head turned looking at me. I was paralyzed in fear. Just recounting this story even as a man almost in my 30s gives me goosebumps and makes my eyes tear up. I slowly backed out of the room, book still in hand and all but forgotten. I backed down the hallway and into the kitchen. I was so scared and just shocked that I did not even tell my mom. I just started to do my homework. I never did mention it to her or anyone. I was tired of being made fun of by my brother for being afraid and tired of being dismissed by my parents, so I just pretended like it did not happen and tried to forget about it, but I obviously never did. Not long after my experience with the doll, we moved to a little town called Riverdale, about 20 minutes away from Weston. A strange little side note, I remember having a dream about the house we moved into years before we moved there. And I knew things from the colors of the carpet to the layout of the house, even which rooms my parents had chosen for me. For some reason, I have had many dreams about places I have never been before, or conversations with people, and even some events that have happened later in my life. I remember dreaming about them. Is that normal déjà vu? I don't know. I have a couple of paranormal dream stories that I feel like I should share. My mother is wonderful, and I love her so much, and I do not blame her for not believing in the paranormal, but she is truly in denial. Years before I was born, my cousin, who was 16 or so at the time, killed himself. My aunt, his mother, was understandably distraught. She was upset by the violent passing of her son, who was worried about the state of my cousin's soul. Because he had committed suicide, she feared he would not be able to get into heaven and would be punished by God, and would be in some sort of hell or purgatory. My aunt did not tell anyone of her sorrows or worries about my cousin's fate and was suffering beyond comprehension. Not long after the passing of my cousin, my mother had a dream. In the dream, my cousin came to my mother and told her to comfort his mother and to tell her he was fine and happy and not to worry about his soul. My mother related the events to my aunt and comforted her about her son and told her not to worry about the state of his soul. My aunt had not told anyone about her worries in this regard, but this event really helped them come to terms with her son's death and comfort in knowing that he had passed on to a better place. I later would have a similar experience. My grandfather died when I was about 21 years old, and I missed him desperately. It was a hard time for our family. One night I had a dream, and in my dream my grandfather came to me and gave me some much-needed advice pertaining to my life at the time. The exact conversation is too sensitive to relate here, but one of the things he emphasized was that choosing the right woman to be my wife and mother of my children was extremely important. Also, he told me to treat my wife with the utmost love and respect. In life, I think my grandfather took my grandmother for granted and chose to be a bit of a grouch toward her. I believe he did not want me to make the same mistake. I don't know much about gifts of the spirit or paranormal, but sometimes I wonder if my family is sensitive to beings from the other side, but we don't know how to use our talents, and in my mother's case, try to suppress them. I live in a small community. You know, the type of place where everyone knows everyone. It is technically a city, even though the population is only 420 people. Yes, you heard that right. 420 people. It feels safe. To understand this story, better let me explain the layout of the city. It is one steep hill, one main street. There are some side streets with some houses, but after the liquor store that closes at 10, it might as well be a ghost town. At the bottom of the hill is a motel. This is where the story will start. Next, there is a gas station, the liquor store, a movie theater that is a historical building, and they still play movies on the weekends, a parking lot, and after that is a restaurant, a post office, and a Pacific Bell building. This is where my father worked at the time. I had been in there many times. Lastly, there were a couple of houses that were mostly vacant. This is where the streetlights stopped, and the rest of the way up, the school, my house, and everything else was in the dark. All in all, it was about a 10 to 15 minute walk to get through the entire town. Okay, now to the story. I was 17 and about 5'0" and 115 pounds. My good friends were caretakers and co-managers of the motel, so they lived in an apartment there. We would hang out every day. Also hanging out was my future boyfriend, then husband, and finally baby daddy. But at the time, he was just a friend. I had a crush on him, but had not said anything as of yet. He would usually drive me home, but that night I said I could walk home by myself, trying to act older, I guess, trying to impress him. He was a little older than I was. I said goodbye and looked up the hill to start my way home. It was a cold and creepy feeling. I had a nervous feeling inside for whatever reason. I was running monster scenarios in my head. The streets were empty and quiet. I told myself I was nervous because I had to walk by the school, which was said to be built on a graveyard, but there were no such things as ghosts, and I walked on. I had not yet passed the gas station when I heard a car coming up the road. I heard him slow down. I did not look. I had my fair share of catcalls, so I knew looking would only make it worse. So I looked down and kept my pace at a quick, but not too quick of a pace. The driver never passed me. He just matched my pace. I should tell you, he was on the opposite side of the street. He cruised at the same speed I was walking, which I found strange. It gave me a feeling of unease and fear. I told myself it is nothing, keep walking. After a little while, probably about 45 seconds, he finally passed me, but just up a little head and pulled a U-turn and pulled up right by me and stopped. Currently, I was right in front of the liquor store. I passed it off and he was checking to see if it was closed, but he looked right at me. His stare went to my stomach. I was mad at myself for looking. I just maybe made him feel invited. What did I do? I thought, what is with this guy? What does he want? It's the liquor store. He's looking for something to inebriate himself, that's it. I kept walking. I heard him drive down the hill, and before I even had a second to feel some sort of relief from the situation that was short-lived, he drove down the hill a short way and did another U-turn, driving back up the hill and following me at my pace, not going faster or slower. I knew he was staring at me, but I kept my head down. Maybe that was the wrong thing to do, but I kept walking. At this point, I was coming up to the theater. After the theater was a large parking lot. As he was following me at the pace, I saw him speed up a little. He ended up stopping on the sidewalk and blocking my way, so there is no way to go. On the west side was the park, where there was no one, which was a bad idea. I had no idea what to do, though. I had no idea what he wanted. Why was he blocking my way? As of now, I was scared. What was he going to do? Was he going to hit me with his car? Was he going to jump out and snatch me? Was he going to pull me into the bushes or a dark place and do who knows what? As I approached the car, thinking of what to do, I noticed a waitress come out from the restaurant. They were ending their shift. Seeing this was my time to act. I said, "Hey, hi." I knew them. I was not friends with them, but I knew their names. So they heard me and acknowledged me, and I started walking over to them. When this car saw them, he left. I walked up to the waitresses and talked for a moment. I saw him drive up the hill and turn off the road that goes up the ridge. That is when the road goes out of town. Whew, I thought to myself, maybe I was safe and he is gone. I say what is up to the waitresses and how's it going. I do not mention anything about the little red car because I figured he lost interest and drove away. I say goodbye and leave. I walk up the hill past the restaurant, past the post office, and past the Pacific building. And then, when there are no more streetlights in the dark, I am walking, feeling safe then in the darkness. Suddenly, I see headlights coming down from the ridge road. I freeze. Is that him? Is that really him? I keep walking, and yes, unfortunately, it is him. He pulls down the road and pulls into the lane that is right beside me and stops. So at this point, I know he either wants something I do not want or he is messing with me. But anyway, I keep walking. Then he puts his car into reverse and follows me up the hill in reverse. Keep in mind, he never says a word. He is only staring at me with a gruesome, hunter-type look. Then he follows me up the hill in reverse. This finally put me into fight or flight mode. I chose to fight. I do not know why, but I screamed at him. I said, "What the heck do you want from me, you freaking creep? Stop freaking following me." I run down to Pacific Building because there is a payphone there. Just so you know, this is when they were taking all the payphones out. So when I got there was no more payphone. I was going to call my dad. I didn't notice this on the way up, probably because I was consumed by this guy. But there is no payphone and no cell phones at the time. I was born in '82, so you can do the math. I could not call my dad. I still screamed at him as he followed me up and down the hill, because I did not know where to go. I was sprinting up and down kind of dumb, but I had nowhere else to go and I didn't know what to do, honestly. So I decided to go back down the hill again. He was following me. Then he pulled down the street, and to my astonishment, he pulled onto the sidewalk again to block my way. It was a way down the street, but still, he was there telling me I had nowhere to go. I was his or something like that. What a creep. Anyway, to my luck, another last waitress came out of the restaurant. This time I did not talk much. I said, "Hey, wait!" She stopped. She looked at me as I was running down the hill. The car was parked on the sidewalk just after the restaurant. He was waiting for me. I told her everything. I said, "That guy is following me. Will you please give me a ride? If you remember, it's just right up the hill." She did. She gave me a ride, and I was home safe. I still heard the car driving around on the street for hours. It had a loud muffler, and after my experience, I think I knew the sound of the car. After it was following me for so long, it was engraved in my memory. I have no idea what that guy wanted. I don't know if I made the right decisions. All I know is that I don't ever want to have to get in a situation like that ever again. Always ask for help if you need it, and if it's available, do not let yourself become a victim. Thanks for listening to my story. I think it's pretty scary. Maybe some might not think so, but if it were you in that situation, I think you might have a creep or two as well. Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true small-town horror stories sent in by viewers just like you. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it be from a small town or something completely different, be sure to submit your story at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this show going on a daily basis. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button, as it really helps me out a ton. The more likes this video gets, the more YouTube promotes it in the algorithm, and that's incredibly beneficial for the channel. If you're new to the channel, why not join us and help the swamps expand? Hit the subscribe button and be sure to turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download and bring your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories with you everywhere you go. You can do that on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and just about everywhere else you find your favorite podcast online. And the best part of it all is it's absolutely free to do so. I'd love to know what story tonight was your favorite. If you can comment down below letting me know, I'd very much appreciate it. I love getting cool conversations started down in the comments. If you guys want to support the swamp outside of hitting that like button and subscribing, maybe check out the merch store. I've got everything from face mask, hoodies, t-shirts, mugs, and much more. Currently, I have an exclusive 2020 Christmas design that'll only be sold until New Year's. So definitely grab one before it's too late. They'll never be printed again after this. Thank you guys as always for supporting the swamp the way you do. I'll see you guys again soon with another creepy video.